Buenas tardes. Buenas tardes. Desde Nueva Delhi, un gusto ver a Gustavo, profesor Ganguly y Anindita. Creo que todo el mundo sabe español, pero hemos prometido hacer esta serie en inglés y la vamos a hacer en inglés porque quedará grabada y aunque hoy somos muy poquitos, luego queremos que alcance a un grupo más grande de gente. Pero bueno, decir que es realmente, it is for me a great pleasure to be able to introduce today a scholar like Adrian Munoz from Mexico, and the second in this series of Mexican Indology. As I said earlier in the previous session, Mexico is probably the Spanish-speaking country that has the best infrastructure for the teaching of Indology. It's not an empty statement. I won't say that there are other countries, like Argentina, Peru, Spain itself, where Indology is also being practiced. But Mexico has the Colegio de México and the UNAM, where you can really follow all the degrees of the study of Sanskrit. And with these remarks, I would like to formally introduce Adrian Munoz, say that Adrian Munoz is an Indologist, writer, and translator. He's a full-time faculty member at the Center for Asian and African Studies, the El Colegio de México, and a specialist in South Asian religious movements. He's also founder and head of Proyecto Yola, a collective network of scholars devoted to studying the history, reception, and practice of yoga in Latin America. Muñoz has authored in Spanish The Tiger Skin and the Serpent, Nat Yogi Identity Through Their Legends. Here is the book. Also, Black Satanic Verses, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell with Exegesis, and also a radiograph of Hatha Yoga. He's also the co-author of A Brief History of Yoga, Historia Mínima del Yoga, which was awarded the 2021 Teaching Tool Accolade at the Sefi Sikas Book Prize, organized by the International Council for Asian Scholars based at the University of Leiden. With David Lorenzen, he co-edited Yogi, Heroes and Poets, Histories and Legends of the Nats. But he's also a literary author, and he has published 2 books of poetry, Kintsugi and Palabras que se agolpan en algún rincón del eco, plus several pieces in different cultural magazines, along with poet Francisco Segovia and translator Juan Carlos Clavillo. He has recently edited an anthology of world love poetry that will be published in the current year. Adrián, un gran placer, a real pleasure to have you. Looking forward to these conversations. And let's start with the beginning. Basically, why this interest in Sanskrit and what did prompt you to study Indology? What were the sources of inspiration?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you and to see you again. No? It's a real pleasure, and it is also an honor to participate in this series of conversations with colleagues. I think this is a very welcome enterprise, and I hope it's going to reach a wider audience. I think it deserves so. And well, I'm very happy to participate. Yes, the beginning is always a rather difficult question because it demands a very elaborate answer, but it is not a very natural or obvious path that I, trodden probably for the most part, Indologists, all around the world, not just in the Spanish language, have a first experience with Indian culture by means of some sort of religious inclination or curiosity. And that wasn't my case. In my case, I was first a student of English literature at Mexico's National University. And then somehow at some point I changed my path, not very drastically, but gradually, and ended up studying Indian history and culture. My goal was, well, I was a BA, an undergraduate student, to become a literary translator. And then at some point I came to El Colegio de Mexico in order to undertake this translators training course. And then I got to know about this Center for Asian and African Studies. Now, by the time I had already begun reading some divulgative stuff about Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. But out
Which
of
year was that,
curiosity.
Adrian?
What year?
Yeah.
That must have been around 1995, 98, more or less. And I began my MA studies in 2000. So I had already been reading some general things on Buddhism, nothing very scholarly, like, books addressed to the general public, as well as some stuff on Advaita Vedanta. Then this began to, kindle my interest in India. I wasn't very close to India. One probable obvious path would have been to go for post-colonial literature, no? Because Indian literature in this regard is very, very strong, but that wasn't my case. I chose India not because of post-colonial literature in English, but because of this initial interest in, say, Indian philosophies. But then I learned about this Center for Asian and African Studies, and then about the possibility of learning the language, in this case Sanskrit, and it was very, very appealing. I had always a tendency for languages, not that I am a polyglot, but I like languages in general, or the word probably, it's not just languages, but the word.
So who were your teachers? So you learned Sanskrit in Mexico, basically, not in India?
No, in Mexico.
And who were your teachers?
I had one specific teacher, but my first class, I need to mention him, is, my former advisor, David Lorenzen. So I came to the very first class for the whole semester and the whole master's program, and I had no knowledge whatsoever about Indian languages in general. And then he taught us the script first, of course, the Devanagari. And then basically he said, well, okay, for tomorrow, you have to learn all of this by heart. We were completely out of our mind. And then we did. And then by the end of the week, the first week, we were already translating a couple of words. But then my main instructor was Rasik Bihari Joshi, who stayed for a long, long time in Mexico. He was a Pandit and Brahmin from Rajasthan. And
you were really privileged, to have a Pandit, a traditional Pandit in Mexico. I think that was a very good choice by the university.
Obviously, a privilege. It was a privilege.
We had to go to Banaras to have that, but you had that in Mexico itself.
Exactly. Yeah, there was some, I don't know, luck or destiny or who knows. But in any case, it was a privilege. And well, I have to say that one of the agents, the person we have to thank for this, is probably none other than Octavio Paz, who was ambassador in India. It was initially Octavio Paz who invited Joshi to Mexico when Octavio Paz was ambassador. So that was the first time that Joshi came to
I
Mexico.
didn't know that. That's a very
Yeah,
important piece of information.
yeah, that was in the 1960s.
Wow.
Octavio Paz was ambassador from
Yeah, he,
62, I think, up to
yeah,
68.
yes.
He had been one time before in the early 90s, but as a cultural attaché, I think. But then he came back in the 60s as an ambassador, and he stayed there for, well, a lot of time, and it was a very productive time for him, intellectually and literary. That's quite interesting. But then it was at that time in the 60s when he invited Joshi. I don't know how he met Joshi, but he invited him to Mexico, and that's the first time that Joshi came to Mexico. Then he probably stayed for a couple of years and went back to India, toured some places around the globe, then came back a second time to Mexico, and then he left. And then he came the third time by the late 90s, and then stayed for good until 2000, 2010, 2013, when he retired. And then went back to India, where he was worshipped as a huge guru, no, a
Yeah.
spiritual leader, as a matter of fact.
In fact, I met him in India when I opened the Cervantes. I think it was after 2010 when he was back in
You're
Delhi,
right.
and I had the luck of meeting him, and conversing with him at that time. Yeah.
He was a fantastic person, really. His aura was very powerful. He was a very kind, good-hearted man, but then, of course, he was also an excellent Sanskrit instructor, and he combined, well, traditional Pandit ways of teaching, but also some input from, say, Western methodologies. He had a
And,
doctorate from France.
okay. And obviously he learned Spanish in Mexico.
He did, yes, he did.
Yeah. So must be one of the few traditional pandits that know Spanish, that knew
Probably.
Spanish.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah.
That really makes a difference. Really.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, of course, that allows you to learn properly Sanskrit without having to leave Mexico. That's the
Yeah, of
case.
course, it was a great opportunity, and then, well, I had classes with Joshi both in my master's and in my PhD degrees. So yes, I didn't have to leave it. It was at some point it was like when I was in the classroom with him, it was like being in India, no? And he would just all of a sudden begin reciting shlokas or panini or whatever.
I know the feeling, Adrian, because when I went to Banaras after, it was for me, a great discovery to see these traditional scholars who are so much neglected in today's India.
Right.
How they have this ability that we somehow lost, or it's not common in the West any longer. I think, which I say it's interiorizing knowledge, and having the knowledge inside of you, and being able to quote, the text. I remember one of my teachers used to teach me the Yoga Sutras without the text, and
Well,
even
yeah.
reciting Vyasa without having to check the text, because everything was inside him. And
Right.
also while teaching, keep quoting shlokas for which makes the learning so enjoyable, no? That's so that I assume that Joshi was also like that in Mexico, which is a
Yes,
wonderful
definitely.
feeling, no?
Yeah, it was very pleasant to attend classes. You didn't suffer classes. You really enjoyed classes with him. Yes.
And you allow me one reflection. For me, it was, I saw some of these pandits when you go to their homes and they teach you the traditional way they know, being wonderful teachers. And I saw the same person at Banaras, at the university, trying to teach in the Western way and being a complete failure, and being a complete, out of tune,
Right.
which explains a lot of things about the state of sometimes of Sanskrit learning in India itself,
Yeah.
because you took these people out of their natural milieu and you put in an artificial setting, you know. I remember one of my teachers, Shri Narayan Mishra, was very critical of the way Sanskrit was taught at the university, you know? And he felt that justice was not being done to the proper way of how he learned. Anyway, it was just, and let's now broaden the scope of the question. And because I know from experience, from knowing you, that you're in touch with other Latin American Indologists, and that you are trying to come together, no? And I would like to ask you if you can just give us information about the state of affairs of Latin American Indology.
Well, of course, I'm not an expert in the academic history of Indology departments in all of Latin America, but of course I do know about specific people and important careers in this field of research. And on the one hand, we can say that it has a long history. No? It's not just something that appears on and off throughout the years, but there's like a tradition. Of course, we are fewer people than in some European countries and in the US, but still we have like a sort of, it's not exactly a parampara, but no, there is something like this. No, of course, Yoshi would be the guru to many of the people who are in Mexico and some people who are abroad, and that's the case for Argentina, for example. No, they had the privilege of housing Fernando Tola and Carmen Dragonetti, who were like very good scholars and Indologists. And of course, they like we say in Spanish, crearon escuela. They, well, created a line of transmission in school, and they had different students who themselves have other students as well. So, for example, my co-author of A Brief History of Yoga, he would be part of this long line of
what's his name? Sorry, what's his name?
Gabriel Martino.
Gabriel Martino, yes.
Yeah, he learned with disciples of Fernando Tola and Carmen Dragonetti. No? And then,
so that's alive in Argentina.
Yes, well, he's probably younger than me, but Fernando Tola and Carmen Dragonetti, they passed away some years ago.
Yes, I know.
And then, of course, Yoshi also died in 2019.
Again, I had the privilege of meeting Fernando Tola in, I think it was 2015, when he was 100 years old.
Wow.
And he traveled to Delhi. He was with Carmen. I never had met, I knew him, I knew his work, of course, but he was 100 years old, and we were together at a seminar here in Delhi. And well, even being 100 years old, he did travel, you know, and deliver his paper.
Wow, I never had the opportunity to meet either of them personally. That's unfortunate.
He was Peruvian, no, actually?
He was Peruvian, yes.
Yeah. And by the way, we can also remember Leon Herrera, I think.
Exactly, yes.
He's another great Indologist, which I don't know if he's still there or he's no more.
No, he passed away very recently. And there is another sad story. You remember Luis Gonzalez Raymond? I think you met him here in Mexico. I just learned that he passed away like 5 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
He was a young guy.
Well, he was 74, I think.
Okay. Well.
But of a very young spirit. But yeah, that's sad. And he would be part of the history of Sanskrit and Indology in Mexico. Of course, he had a long career in the University of California at Berkeley. But he did his MA in El Colegio de Mexico and then moved to the US to pursue a PhD. Yes, that's very sad, no? But I think it's worth mentioning his name, no, and his career to make like sort of homage.
And what is the relation with the United States? And I mean, it casts his long shadow on Mexico regarding Indology, and I think it's a good shadow, no, because they have great scholars there.
Yes,
What
it
is
does, but it's
you
not
can
like
benefit from that?
we benefit probably more on the part of editorial world, meaning that there is more or less an easy access. Of course, nowadays it's even easier, but I'm speaking, say, 15, 20 years ago, without much of internet, and there was no Amazon.com and stuff. Yet we had like the an easier way to get materials, scholarly materials from the U.S. And that's probably one of the benefits of being so close. Of course, there are other things which are not so beneficial, but we don't have like a constant or very lofty exchange of people all the time. Of course, we have visiting scholars now and then, and we have, of course, American members of staff in El Colegio de México. That is very true. Of course, David Lorenzen, to begin with, no. Even though he's North American, and then he earned his PhD in Australia, he basically constructed all of his career in Mexico City, no? In different languages, but.
And let's move ahead. And you are also the founder of and head of Proyecto YOLA, right? A collective network of scholars devoted to studying the history, reception, and practice of yoga in Latin America. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this is in a way. What I seek is to make a contribution to Latin American Indology on the one hand, and on the other to widen the scope of the field of modern yoga studies, which is becoming stronger and stronger. It is a more or less recently created field of research. It's not very long, it's not more than 15, 20 years old. It is blooming, but then of course what they usually lack is a more global outlook, so to speak. They are usually very Anglophone, no? Centric. And that means that they are usually unable to make or to account for different developments in other parts of the world which are usually not Anglophone, no? And then of course the Hispanosphere is huge. It's almost a whole continent.
It
No?
is.
And then you have, of course, Spain, and then you have at least one country, Western Sahara, it is, in Africa.
Well, no, there are more. Yeah, there are more countries that speak Spanish, like
it's a
Guinea.
huge world, no? And then, of
Yeah.
course, it would be naive to think that everything regarding the practice of yoga in these countries or in this linguistic world just follows the path of Anglophone developments. It doesn't. Some of the trends do follow the path, but there are many other things, no? So these are like the two simultaneous goals. On the one hand, make contributions to the field of modern yoga, but then also reinforce or strengthen the role of Latin American Indologists in particular, no? And then, of course, this is because it's just impossible for just one person to do the research of the history of yoga in Latin America. It's just impossible. So I really gave a lot of thought of in bringing together different scholars. This is something that doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately. This is one of, in the case of Mexico, for example, a result is that we are usually, for many things, just closer to the U.S. and forget about, widening our links, scholarly links with other people in the region. Of course, it depends on the specific topic of research. Of course, if you're doing Latin American history or literature, or it would be obvious to have those connections. But if you do South Asian or African studies, then it's more difficult. Sometimes we lack cohesion, no? some of us don't even quote each other, except for, of course, Fernando Tola or Carmen Dragonetti or Oscar Pujol.
Oh, come on. No, but
um,
you touch a very important point, because you mentioned the Hispanic sphere, and we have to make our voice in Spanish, and we must speak louder and make our voice heard all over the world, because, as you say, we are a continent. And I
exactly.
think, and that gives me, a lot of, and I think all of us should, a lot of inspiration that we can do a lot of things. And one key factor, as we know, and I was going to ask you about that, is yoga. Of course, yoga has become a global thing, and yoga in the Hispanic sphere, it can do a lot to strengthen our knowledge of Sanskrit and our knowledge of Indology. In fact, you are the co-author with Martino of Historia Mínima del Yoga, no? A brief history of yoga. Now, my question is, and this is for the general public, I think people are very confused about what yoga is, how many types of yoga are there, what is the relation of postural contemporary yoga to Patanjali's yoga. Can you briefly, try to enlighten us and in a few, how the basic question, and as what is the relation between modern yoga, postural yoga, when it was born, and what we know as the classic form of yoga, which is Patanjali's, no? Because I think that amazes me, there are many differences, as we know,
Right.
but even modern schools take Patanjali as the founder, which sometimes it's really, and we know
Right.
that the distance between both kind of yoga is very huge, and people don't realize that. What can you say about that?
This is a little bit of a tricky question, of course. It's not easy to answer for various reasons. It is a complicated issue, and on the other hand, it can sometimes contradict some people's notions and sentiments about yoga or what they think yoga is. But these, seemingly contrast between, say, classical traditions of yoga or the philosophy of yoga and the contemporary practice was the first thing that prompted me to go into modern yoga studies. No, I didn't begin studying India because of this. I began studying because I read Buddhism and then Advaita Vedanta, then became enthralled by Hindu mythology, no, and then like trained myself as, say, historian of religions, and then moved to yoga and so forth and so forth. But yeah, there is a difference, I think. There are probably many differences, but there are a couple of striking, very categorical difference between more traditional or classical forms of yoga, specifically Patanjala yoga, as found in the Yoga Sutra, and what usually you find in most practices in the world. No, sometimes even in some places in India, no? Because of the pizza effect. And I would say that even with the risk of being too simplistic, Patanjali yoga, unlike most modern practices, is much more philosophical. Definitely, the Yoga Sutra is a work of philosophy, no, and this goes hand in hand with the fact that the Yoga Sutra or Patanjala yoga is also more meditation oriented. It is also anchored in a Sanskritic world, and that means that there is a lot of stress on scriptural study. It's the study of Sanskrit and the Shastras in the Sanskrit language. This is very obvious and important in this classical tradition. And in modern postural yoga, you have very different things. You have, to begin with, a much more popular, you would even say democratic approach to yoga, because everybody can approach yoga. I mean, 2,000 years ago, not everybody could do that. Just a very small group of people, no? And usually pandits, no? And then at some point, of course, some ascetics, no? But even ascetics are not the common people, no?
No, I'm sure that at the time of Patanjali and maybe in the Middle Ages, at the time of Granda and all this, they will be very surprised to see that householders are practicing yoga for fitness, you know.
Right, right.
That would be something really amazing to them.
No, definitely. No, and then of course in most contemporary practice, there is a stronger emphasis on bodily work than usually what you find in Patanjala yoga, which is not at all centered on the body. On the contrary, no? Patanjala yoga is about separating Prakriti and Purusha. No, it's not about joining but separating. No, in order to reach, well, the ultimate state of mind. And then, of course, I also think that you can problematize this further, but especially nowadays, contemporary practice of yoga or postural yoga doesn't put a lot of emphasis on Guru Shishya Paramparas. Probably around the 1980s and 1990s, yes, because of some key figures, but nowadays that's changing, I think, very fastly. And then, of course, there is not a place for renunciation. People who practice yoga are not renunciates. Of course, they can give up some diet and then adhere to some particular, custom, become vegetarians or vegans or etc. But that's not the same as renunciation in the, in the traditional sense of the term, which means giving up your social role in a community. No, that's what renunciation means. I give up my name, even because my name is tied to a social class, to a work, to obligations. No, that's what you give up. No. So that's a very drastic difference.
Yes, while preparing this talk, I was thinking, that perhaps at least we could identify 4 different approaches to yoga today. I would like to know your opinion on that and the first one will be the pre-modern religious approach. What I mean by that, I mean by the living traditions of yoga still in India, like the Nat yogis, which I think it's a living tradition, and correct me if I am wrong, and many others, which integrate yoga as part of their sadhana, part of their practice. And I say pre-modern because this has no influence from 19th century yoga, from all this reform. Another approach would be the modern religious approach, like Shivananda, like so many gurus, and you have a religious approach there, and you follow a guru which integrates this reform yoga after Vivekananda, of course, and all the reform that took place, and of course after the great gurus of yoga, like Iyengar and all that. But still you follow inside that a kind of modern reform religious approach. And we have many ashrams and many, both in India and outside India, when you find this modern religious approach. Then we have, of course, the modern secular approach, who will be more those people who are doing yoga for fitness, basically. And we have thousands or maybe say millions of practitioners all over the world, even in India, who take yoga as a form of fitness, And I'm not criticizing that, everything is just, And then I think it's the approach that we are very interested, you and me and many in Indology, is the academic approach, right?
Right.
Is when you study yoga as history. And I think that's what you've been done in your books, right? But my question is, of course, and now we'll talk to that because you study a lot of Nat yoga. Right. I know nothing about that except what I read in your books. and I would like just to show them again, because that I think is the first one from 2010, La piel del tigre y la serpiente. I don't know if it is visible properly. It's a really, I really admire you for this kind of work, because this is a pioneering work in Spanish. We don't have work in Spanish of this sort, And the other one is, of course, Radiografía del Hatha Yoga. I think that came after, no? If I'm not wrong.
Yes.
In 2016, I think.
This is 2016, yes.
Which relates, and this one, which is in English, with David Lawrenson, published in Sunny Press, which is Yogi, Heroes, and Poets. That's in English. So, but the two that are in Spanish, they're really unique works, So I would like to speak a little bit. I mean, time is flying, really. We already spent a lot of time, but that's the nature of time, as we know. But I would like, even if briefly, to say something, because in the Skin of the Tiger and the Serpent, you say that this work explores the symbolic and real mechanisms of interaction between yoga practices and folkloric religious narrative. And that's a book that is based on a detailed analysis of a set of legends. And most of them, and I underline that because this to me is very important, translated for the first time into an European language, which happens to be Spanish. Please tell us about Nat Yoga. Who are these Nats? And I think they're still alive, these people. You can still find them in India, no? It's not a dead tradition.
No. They are pretty much alive. It is already a very, old order, religious order. We are not exactly sure when they actually appeared for the first time, but probably
11th, 12th century, you said?
Maybe 12th, 13th century. Of course, we don't have exact dates for Goraknath or Matsyendranath, which are the legendary founding members. But we do have a lot of historical records that attest to the presence of members of this yogic tradition. Especially from the times of the Sultanate of Delhi and the Mughal Empire. Many dignitaries and emperors, rulers, and so forth, they had the fascination for these yogis. And you actually have a lot of Mughal paintings or miniatures representing them. That's quite interesting. And it wasn't only Akbar, for example, who is very famous for being like very ecumenical and interreligious and so forth. Many other important characters as well. And then for many time, most of scholars thought that the Nat yogis were the creators of Hatha yoga, and therefore the main diffusers of this form of yoga all around India, or all around South Asia. Now, due to the most recent scholarship, we are not that sure. No, in any case, they were traditionally linked to Hatha yoga, and there are many texts in Sanskrit on Hatha yoga which are ascribed to the Nat yogis, even though the identity is a little bit uncertain. No, but still, like, this is part of a received tradition. That doesn't mean that all of the Nat yogis nowadays practice Hatha yoga. Many of them don't. But the thing is that the order is not a very coherent, closed, solid one. There are like different branches of the Nat yogis, and of course the most powerful and important one is, because of the main temple, is in Gorakhpur, where Yogi Adityanath, he's the head, the mahant of the mat, and then of course he's also a political figure. So yes, they are still around, no? Mm-hmm. In the most recent text on Hatha yoga in Sanskrit, from say 13, 14, 15 centuries, I think that the stress is on gaining, and this is very different from Yoga Sutra, is gaining siddhi. No? Whereas Patanjali said, on the path of yoga in your practice, many powers will arise. You have to forget about them. That's not the
Yeah.
case in Hatha Yoga. You have to cultivate cities.
Yes.
So that's a very different approach, no?
Yes.
Of course, I could go on and on, but time is running.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. For Patanjali, siddhis, he say, in Virtane, it says samadau upasarge. They are obstacles to samadhi, siddhis, certainly for him, no? And they are to be avoided, no? And these are different. But are they the creators of Hatha Yoga?
No, I don't think they are, because as a matter of fact, the earliest text that we found that literally mentions a practice called Hatha Yoga is the Amrita Siddhi, which comes from a Buddhist milieu.
Okay.
Then this is the oldest text that we have. We don't have an older one. There may be an older one, but we just don't have it. So that's interesting, and this puts into question a lot of our usual assumptions. Very probably this practice of Hatha Yoga comes from a very interreligious milieu in which Buddhists, Vaishnavas, Shaktas, Shaivas somehow coincided or exchanged knowledges in tantric context, in which there was a lot of alchemy. Hatha Yoga, in many senses, is an alchemical operation in order to bring a transmutation process on the body.
So they use substances? You say alchemical?
Well, some of them, not all of them, but some of them. No, well, according to some scholars, probably not anymore. But in the medieval times, yes, no, and actually that's something that you find in some historical records. This ruler or governor or emperor comes to some yogi in order to, have a medicinal help
longevity
by alchemical
also, no?
processes.
And get longevity, no?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
And Adrian, to study them, did you come to India and stay with them, interview them, talk to them?
In this case, I did basically a textual approach. Well, I did go to India, but mainly to get material to buy or photocopy either books or other sort of materials, because of course in Mexico you don't have this material. Of course you can buy online a scholarly book on this or that topic, but the more traditional publications of the legends, for example, they're simply not there. They're not even on the web.
Okay.
You have to go and buy these things on bazaars, pilgrimage sites, ashrams, and so forth and so forth, or the Goraknath temple, for example. I did interview a couple of Nat yogis in Delhi, in Gorakhpur, in Kathmandu as well. No, but the research that's represented in this book, the tiger skin and the serpent, is basically a philological approach, by comparing the legends and the texts on Hatha Yoga and a couple of 17th century mystical poems also associated to the Nat Yogis.
One last question regarding this, and I could go on and on, but you're right, time is running. What is the relation of Kabir, the well-known Kabir, to them? He was one of them, or he had influence?
No, he wasn't a practitioner of yoga, but he was contemporary to the Nat Yogis. And of course, Kabir, he belongs more or less to the 15th century. No, that's before the Mughal period, and he must have lived either under part of Sultanate of Delhi or the Sultanate of Jaunpur. He was basically based in Banaras, so it depends on the specific period. But then by the time the night yogis were very, very famous, and they tend to appear time and time again in Kabir's poetry, as they also do in Guru Nanak's poetry.
Yes.
And you can see that this happens because there is a sort of contest. Of course, if they appear in Kabir, in Nanak, it's usually because the two poets usually attacked
Yes.
the Nagyogis. They don't like what they do and they
Sometimes they're very
criticize them.
critical of
No?
them, no?
And that's an evidence that they were very famous. They were very successful at the time. No, of course, because both Kabir and Nanak, they are in a way trying to increase their popularity and their followers. No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes,
but the thing is that Kabir's poetry has a lot of yogic imagery. So even though he
he criticizes them,
criticizes the
but he
Nagyogis,
uses
he's
the
influenced.
material, right?
Yeah,
No?
yeah,
He uses the material from them, and he's,
yeah,
even if while criticizing them.
yeah, definitely, yes.
No, it's a
The
very
sun and the moon
fascinating,
imagery, yes, all the time.
it's a very fascinating chapter, relation of Kabir with them, and really the critique sometimes is very hard as he does, it's uncompromising. They say that they
Yeah.
are full of pride and their postures and all that, but at the same time, he's heavily influenced by them. Anyway, we could go on, but I would like to ask you at least one more question before opening the floor to our friends. Say, in which thing are you working now?
Um, much to my regret, I'm usually working on different things, too many things. It's very difficult. Of course, now my main line of research is Proyecto Yola, this uh, initiative to study the history and practice of yoga in different parts of Latin America. I'm focusing on Mexico, obviously, but trying to make team with these other friends and colleagues from Argentina, Chile, Brazil. Um, and then, of course, this demands many different micro projects, no? Research that is centered on specific points of time and key agents. I've done a couple of things on a former president, Mexican president, Francisco Madero, who was
Oh,
an
yes.
ardent reader of the Bhagavad Gita.
I know. Yeah, yeah. That's
And
a very interesting chapter of this history of Mexico.
yeah, I'm finishing a chapter on an essay on Francisco Madero. I hope
Oh,
this is going to get published this year or probably early 2023. Then
please let us know when that
I
happens.
will. I will. An article on Jose Vasconcelos and his Estudios Indostánicos and his understanding of yoga already appeared in a journal, an academic journal. Then right now I'm working on a visit that Paramahamsa Yogananda did to Mexico.
Okay.
Not just Mexico City, other parts of Mexico as well
I didn't know
in the
that.
late 1920s. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm always writing on some other stuff. I have a pending thing. I owe our friend Agustin Paniker, I owe him a book, a translation of 3 texts on Hatha Yoga, as a matter of fact, Sanskrit texts on Hatha Yoga. So I hope I can manage to do this more or less soon. And I apologize to him. I'm very embarrassed, but the pandemic's actually made it worse. I had more work and online meetings, so it became more difficult. But well, that will happen at some point. What else do I have? Okay, I have just finished editing a volume with Sergio Armando Renteria, which is in honor of late Rasik Bihari Joshi. It's a collection of essays of Indology, no, of former students, and well, there are a couple of other projects, but I won't say.
Well, you have a lot of things on your plate,
Too much.
clearly. And you do teaching also there at the colegio?
Right now I am teaching a history course from 12th to 18th century. We are in the middle of the course. And well, that demands a great deal of time, of course, no? Even though I have taught this course a couple of times before, this happens every 2 years, so you have to reread some stuff, incorporate new readings. It demands a lot of time and effort. But this is a very fascinating period of history. Yeah.
So good, you know. I'm really delighted, you see, and as I said, these two books in Spanish are real milestones for the studies, and I just take the opportunity, as he said, also to Oscar and to that we should, you know, try to use better this wonderful technology that we have now,
Right.
and try to meet more often, and we have, quoting Ortega y Gasset, an Indología invertebrada. And we should try, you know, to make reality this Hispanic sphere in Sanskrit, because I think really we should try and use all these things. Huh?
Regarding your last comment, I think one real milestone for really strengthening the role of, say, Indology in Spanish is obviously
well
this jewel. No, we did not have any dictionary. We needed this so badly. So we are really grateful.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks.
No, thank you.
That was not supposed to. Thanks. No, it's a real, you know. But we should work and make the Hispanic sphere in Indology more powerful, okay, and more cohesive, because I think we have a lot of things to say, all of us. And we have friends in Spain, we have friends in Mexico, in Costa Rica, in Argentina, in Peru, in Colombia, in Brazil too. We shouldn't forget. Yeah. And this is one of the reasons of this series, and starting with Mexico, but let's hope and one day at least do a seminar, you know, on Zoom. You know, I am all available for you in helping to organize these things. Okay, that's for me. It's a big step. And we should conclude. It's been an hour since almost we started, and I would like to open the floor, even if we are very few people. I know that Gustavo is here, and our dearest friends Ganguly is here. Professor Ganguly, you're coming from Hispanic studies, but with such enormous curiosity for all the subjects. Please, you have the floor.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Before me, some Sanskritologist or Indologist, if he's there, he might ask a question. I would be asking a very side question, but if there is anyone who wants to enter into deeply into the area of Sanskrit, if anyone is there, please go ahead. I can ask. I can wait.
No, go ahead, okay, Professor
okay.
Ganguly, please.
No, I'm delighted to be here in this conversation between two very well-known Indologists and Sanskritologists. It has been an experience. You know, we have done yoga from childhood, but we have only paid attention to the fitness part of it. Whereas yoga is deeply embedded in so much of philosophical areas, thought, you know, and that thinking, this lecture by our Mexican friend Adrián has really aroused my curiosity to go a little bit into that part of yoga, which is a great source of knowledge. You know, that is one thing. Thank you very much, Adrián, for this lecture. I am, you know, very curious to know about another thing. You know, I was in Mexico, in the El Colegio de Mexico, as well as in UNAM, in 1980, 81, and then again, number of times, 4 or 5 times in different periods. I knew, I had good friendship with Professor Joshi and Benjamin Preciado. At that time, Professor Urquidi was the president of El Colegio. You were, I don't know whether you were probably not born at that time. No, but that was 80s. And it was at that time that I got introduced to another great scholar of Sanskrit, which I thought would come up in your conversation. That was Juan Miguel de Mora.
Yes, you're right.
And you know, he in my first stay in Mexico in 1981, it was just a casual friendship. But later when I visited, our friendship grew very strong. And I even stayed at his house. He even invited me to stay at his house and invited me to give high-level lectures at UNAM on, of course, my subject, which is the, Spanish and Latin American studies. And within that, the comparative area of reception studies. How is India received in Latin America, Indian themes, Indian authors, and vice versa. How is Latin America received in India? That's my area of study. But in my conversations with Juan Miguel de Mora, you know, because I was also very interested in theater. I have been into theater for the last 60 years. So I was talking to him about theater, and he.
Oh,
I'm sorry, we lost the sound. I think you muted yourself involuntarily.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Is that all right?
Right. Now
So, you know, at that time, I mean, since I was in theater for a long time, and I started discussing with, he started asking the questions, and then he asked me a very, very, deep sort of question. He said, tell me, you are an Indian, you tell me, what is the beginning of theater in India? Wow. Where does it begin? So, and I was puzzled. I was flabbergasted. And well, I told him about our traditions in various parts of India, or from the earliest of times, from the Jatra to the open stage activity, etc., you know, in various parts of in Bengal and other parts. But to my surprise, he told me, do you know that your theater in India, you know, began, it is registered in the Rig Vedas? And I was very curious. I said, tell me. And he then brought out a book that he was translating at that time. That was Bhavabhuti. That was, you know, the translation of Uttara Charita Ramayana. Now, he was translating that. And there, he, in his introduction, he showed me how he, identifies at least 7 or 8 mandalas in various parts of the Gita, where there is this dialogue form, you know, for example, between the Yama and the Yami, you know, and they are, but it is a completely theatrical form that is being used by these in Rig Veda. And he showed me many. So I was greatly surprised by this. And then, of course, this Bhavabhuti came out, and he later gave me a copy in later years when I went of this book, and it was a fantastic experience to see his translation, to read his translation of, and I could not read Sanskrit, but I read it in the Spanish version, you know, of this great work. So this is the way a person like him, a Sanskritologist like him, and of course he was a novelist and a journalist, and he was whatnot. No, I learned about our own tradition from this Sanskrit translation, a translation of this Sanskrit theme. Now, I was just wondering whether you people ever came across works by him, or ever talked to him, or could interact with him, since he was in UNAM teaching in the Centro de Investigaciones Científicas, whether you could interact with him and gain from that kind of knowledge with persons like him. This was my curiosity.
Right. Well, yeah, the reason why I failed to mention Juan Miguel de Morais is because I actually never met him. Of course, I knew about him, but I learned about him only by the time when I was at Colegio de Mexico studying my MA. Even
his
though,
wife, his wife too, Ludwika.
I do have his translation of the Rig Veda. Actually, I've used his translations a couple of times in my classes. But the reason why I didn't know about him before is because I was studying English literature. Even though I was at the same university, even in the same school, he was usually teaching for the Department of Hispanic Literature. We never crossed paths, no? As was actually the case with Elsa Cross, a very famous poet and herself very interested in Hindu culture, but he belongs to the philosophy department. I came to know her, and we are now like very endeared to each other, but very much later. So I never had a class with de la Mora. That's going to be a different case with Wendy Phillips. She was a disciple to Juan Miguel de Mora. So you would have then a different outlook of Mexican Indology, because she's from UNAM. She was his student, no? And I had a different path.
Yes. In fact, Professor Ganguly, we mentioned him in the last session with Oscar Figueroa, and I had the privilege of meeting him. Actually, I met him for the first time in Bangalore during the World Sanskrit Conference. He used to be president of that organization. Right. And I also met him last time with Wendy at his home in a beautiful place in the mountains in Mexico, near the city, with Ludwika. He was already very old. I met him several times. I have many of his books here behind me, I could show you.
Ajusco, that was the place.
I was twice there.
That's quite close to El Colegio de Mexico.
Yes.
It's a beautiful place, and he loved to live in that natural surroundings.
Oh, yes.
And I have many books of him here. I know his Uttara Ramacharita, that was a translation of that word, a major thing too. And of course, it's a person we should celebrate, and it's a pity that he's no longer.
He called it the El Último Trance de Rama.
El Último Trance de Rama. Yeah. And he was such a polyphacetic man, because as you said, he used to write novels. I mean, and novela policíaca, exactly. When he was, and the most astonishing thing about him, that he was a fighter in La Batalla del Ebro when he was 15 years old. And he got, he was a brigadista, as we say it in Spanish. Wow. He got a pension by the socialist government of Spain. He was living on a Spanish pension for the brigadistas. Imagine. And he was really, a Renaissance man, and not only an Indologist, but a very special person. I had the privilege of knowing him, and we are very happy that you mentioned him. And as Adrian says, he came from another line. That's why. Yeah. But I actually went with Wendy the last time, and after this 2016 I was, and I'm sure Wendy is the person who took the torch, and continuing this line of research at UNAM where he was teaching.
Yeah. Right.
So thanks very much for mentioning him. I don't know if anyone would say Gustavo.
I just wanted to. Yes. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to bring in just one last thing. It's not related to Juan Miguel de Mora, but taking into account that Professor Ganguly is an expert in Latin American culture, and especially because he's interested in intercultural dialogue, so to speak. You may find of interest. I wrote this article on the reception of India in Octavio Paz's work. It's written in Spanish. I'm sure you can read Spanish, as you've mentioned. Yes. So I enjoyed it a lot, actually.
I have already read it.
Okay.
because
Yeah, I was
because
sure about that.
I have worked on Octavio Paz, and
Yeah.
I had a deep interest in him. I've written quite a few articles on him, and I have seen your article. Thank you so much. I've really
Well,
gained
I'm
from it.
flattered. And by the way, today is Octavio Paz's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's great you say that, and we miss
And
that,
well,
but
this is
that's
less
really, a special day then.
Yeah, this is
Well-
very fortunate. And
well,
less
don't-
interesting, but yesterday was mine.
That's also interesting.
Oh, lovely, lovely.
As I told, we have today the Mexicans here in Delhi are very busy with the minister. That's why they couldn't come. But it's so nice to know that today is Octavio Paz's birthday. Let's give the floor to Gustavo. I think he can speak from Argentina. Gustavo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I think I cannot put my video. Maybe it's not allowed, Oscar.
No?
But if you can listen
Let
to
me,
me.
Martí, are you there? I think he has some problems in starting the video. Oh,
There it
now,
is.
We can see you
we
now.
see you. Okay.
Gustavo,
Okay.
buenas
Good
tardes.
morning.
Gustavo, buenas
tardes,
tardes.
Shamu, Oscar, and Adrian. Really a pleasure to have you all in this conversation, because it's not only Adrian's answers, but also being questioned by Oscar is such a wonderful opportunity. And it's very important, the series you are organizing, Oscar, and this stress you did to get in touch and to keep updated on our Spanish trend, because if not, we fell on the English most diffused studies. I wanted to, if Adrian, you mentioned about the Amrita City, the new discoveries that I think they are related to Hatha Yoga project by James Mallison and so on. If you could just give a brief idea, not to develop, but the items they have been discussing as this really astonishing, not that the first Hatha Yoga text comes out of Buddhist tradition. I know they are working on several manuscripts and getting new information about the development of the Hatha Yoga traditional text in Sanskrit.
Well, first of all, nice as always to see you, dear Gustavo. It's always a pleasure to have chance to chat. Well, in this case, for the particular case of the Amrita Siddhi, I haven't had a chance to go over it because of my various obligations. Yet I am usually very close to what the team of the Hatha Yoga project have been doing, and they're doing amazing work. They are really a parteaguas. I forgot the word for this in English. And our understanding of pre-modern yoga has been changing. Not just pre-modern, also modern yoga has been changing very drastically. And yes, one of the things that they are doing is work with manuscripts. Many of them, of course, have not been edited, and evidently they have not been published in translated versions in any other language. And this is going to prove very helpful for our understanding. I'm not sure if he's already done the critical edition of the Amrita Siddhi. There are many critical editions that I have been working on, not just the Amrita Siddhi, the Yoga Villa, and well, several other, the Tatra Yoga Shastra, and I forgot the other titles. And all of the interesting thing is that all of them are earlier than the most well-known texts on Hatha Yoga, which are the Hatha Pradipika, the Garanda Samhita, the Shiva Samhita. All of them are later works. And by having this more panoramic view from the Amrita Siddhi up to the, say, Garanda Samhita, we can see how even Hatha Yoga has been changing, no? Of course, they don't teach the same things, or they don't lay emphasis on the same techniques. One of the striking things is that you see a growing number of asanas no? Or bodily postures. In the earlier works, usually you find, for example, Koraksha Shataka, just a mention of a couple of them, no? Or the same in Yoga Villa, it only mentions one, no? The Koraksha Shataka mentions just 4 asanas, and then the more recent the work, the greater the number of asanas. So this is an interesting thing. We can see this. I don't remember if the Amrita Siddha actually mentions any asana, but it lays emphasis on what seems to be the leitmotif of Hatha Yoga practice in the classical text of Hatha Yoga, which is pranayama, the control of breath, or breathing rather, because it goes hand in hand with the harnessing of subtle powers and vital powers, no? It goes hand in hand as well with the notion that you can control the energies within your body, and therefore you can control the energy, the external energies, no? And this is Siddhi, actually. The title of that text is Amrita Siddhi, no? The perfection or the power of immortality. This is key to Hatha Yoga. The goal is to achieve immortality. Jivan Mukta means you become immortal. It's not merging into nirvana once your body dies. No, you won't die. No, this is Hatha Yoga, traditional Hatha Yoga, no, classical Hatha Yoga. So there is a lot of things that are going to be published in the next years, of course.
Coming out.
And this is fascinating. Well, let's see what happens. I'm really craving for these critical editions. No? This is part of reasons with my own translations have been lagging. Now I'm waiting for some of these, but well, let's see.
Thank you, Adrian.
Thanks.
And thank you also, Oscar. Another one that thanks your dictionary, because it's so useful for us and so easy, not dealing with Mona Williams, but dealing with Jules. Oh, thank you very much.
Thanks. I feel rewarded by those comments, really. So we are running out of time. I don't know if Anindita and Regina would like to say briefly something.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So just a minute.
Open your camera.
For this, I thank you, Senator Oscar Puzal, for this beautiful evening. So because I think the persona intrusa, something like that, because I've not that much knowledge neither in philosophy nor in Sanskrit, just school level knowledge of Sanskrit. Now I'm having more interest after this enriching experience talking with Adrian. And Professor Adrian is one of my observation or my just comment, because I'm also a practitioner of this yoga, of course, the asanas, not through the Patanjali way of a philosophical approach we lack today. And just an anecdote just want to share, because I have heard from this one person went to a guru to learn about this yoga, which Patanjali mentions in his Yoga Sutra, like Ashtangik yoga. And then the guru started to start with the Sham, Dam, and Niyam, and Pranayam, and then Asana. But the person went very enthusiastic. He said, like, no, I know all these things. You just teach me Asana, that part. So the guru was very astonished, and he said, like, so what do you want to learn actually, Ashtangik yoga or Vikalang yoga? Because if you keep some part, it turns to, instead of Ashtangik, it's a divide of some parts, and you turn in a Vikalang, that is a person with invalidity. So this is now the approach all over the world is like something like that. Just an anecdote I wanted to share with all you. Thank you so much for this beautiful evening.
Thank you for your commentary, and as a matter of fact, it makes me remember that I felt to say a couple of things. I don't know, like half an hour ago, and it should be important to take into account that even though we scholars speak of traditional, classic, or modern forms of yoga is different from, say, ascribing values to any of them. There isn't like no more legitimate form of yoga than another. They all have something beneficial, important, interesting, of course. They have different approaches to life, different goals, different methodologies, but they all, are, yes, legitimate. But there is something that is quite common. There is a tendency to think that everything ancient is per se superior or better, and that's not true. No? That's untrue. I mean, like aspirins, for example, they are not ancient, and they are helpful. Slavery is old, and that's definitely not a good thing. No. So,
Yeah.
but we're so easily trapped into thinking that if it is ancient and older, then it's got to be better, and it's not always the case.
All is gold.
Yes, no? And I mean, many things have changed in yoga, and some of the changes have been good, I think, no? Of course, we can always point to some more objectionable things, but that doesn't mean that every modern form of yoga is wrong or anything like this. Definitely not. Many people have derived a lot of benefits from practicing meditational, postural,
Yeah.
or whatever form
Mindfulness
of yoga.
practices. Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
That's the
exactly.
beauty of yoga. No?
Yeah. Yeah. And it is partial.
Right.
Thanks very much for that
Thank you so
observation.
much.
I don't know if Regina wants to say something. Otherwise, you are invited. Yeah,
Hello,
of course.
I can't turn on my video. I don't know, it doesn't let me, but
I think Martí has to give you permission.
okay, perfect.
1 minute. Martí? Okay, now you are there.
Okay, hello. Yeah, it's more like a comment. I have many questions, but there is not enough time. It's really motivating to see this kind of spaces for Spanish speakers and all the areas of studies that are still to be studied. So thank you. It's like a place where academic studies become more accessible, and I'm looking forward to future spaces like this one and Proyecto Yola. For example, it's amazing. I was a Mexican, it's really amazing to see that. So yeah, just thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Regina.
Now, Martí, want
Yes.
to close the session? Adrián, I don't know if you have some else to say. It's okay with you?
Well, probably one last comment is, because this is also something I forgot to mention about yoga and yoga studies, is that another change is that the community of yoga practitioners and the community of yoga scholars are coming closer to each other. There was a traditional gap between them and a suspicion between them. And this is changing, and this is, I think, is very good, because we're like becoming part of a larger community, multifaceted for sure, but a larger, just one community. And I think it's quite interesting that there are many practitioners more interested in gaining more reliable information about the history of yoga in general. And on the other hand, scholars willing to talk to practitioners and not just stick to ancient texts. That's quite something, I think. That's good, no? Bridging the gap.
A very important comment, just to close, a very good note to close this. So, Martí?
Yes, well, so we're gonna wrap up the session for today. So I just want to thank Adrián again, and for this interesting conversation with Oscar. Thank you, both of you. And well, so the series continues, and on April 28th we will have Wendy Phillips from the UNAM at 7:30, and you're all invited. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Bye, bye. Hasta luego, adiós.
Hasta luego.
Muchas gracias, muchas
Buen
gracias.
día,
Adrián.
buena noche, buena lo que sean los
Sí,
distintos
que tú
lugares
tengas
del
un
mundo.
buen día, que empieza en México, nosotros lo acabamos.
Buen
Muchas
día y
gracias, de verdad.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas
Muchas
por esta
gracias.
magnífica sesión.
Gracias a
Gracias.
todos.
Estará en
Gracias.
YouTube disponible, ya te avisaremos cuando esté. ¿De acuerdo?
Muy bien, gracias.
Adiós.
Muchas gracias. Buenas noches.
Hasta luego.
Adiós.
Adiós, Gustavo. Adiós a todo el mundo.